Yes, we do.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Loreto community and the Latin American and Caribbean Committee, welcome to our Immigration Spotlight, a gathering every 2 weeks where we are presented with information about immigration, migrants, asylum seekers, pertinent issues that are surfacing. So we use this time to bring in experts, guests, to present information, and we discuss it. So as you all have heard, this session is being recorded, and we will begin with a reflection, and then we will move on to our program for today. So Sally, I think that you will be offering the reflection. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Rosa. I am. We thought at this time of the year, having just recognized the 4th of July, for whatever meaning that has for each of us, that perhaps reading once again the sonnet, which is on the Statue of Liberty, might be appropriate this morning. It's called The New Colossus by Emma Lazarus. Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land, here at our sea-washed, sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame. Keep, ancient lands, your storied pomp, cries she with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door.
Thank you so much, Sally. Thank you for that very appropriate reflection during this time. So we are thrilled to introduce Helen Thorpe. I think many of you know her. Helen Thorpe is a co-member in process, and she is working with the LACC, the Latin American Caribbean Committee. And we're so happy that you're helping to organize and run this Immigration Spotlight. So I'm going to turn it over to Helen, who will do the run of the show for us. Thank you so much, Helen. Welcome.
Thanks, Rosa. It's wonderful to be with you all, and I love that I get to stay up to date through the immigration spotlights, which are really a wonderful tool to learn what's going on in this ever-changing landscape. I want to introduce Zach New, and I know the law firm that Zach works for because they've successfully represented some students that I know who are seeking DACA and others who are seeking to change their status and did have a path to citizenship. And I know that this law firm is extremely good at what they do. And Zach is a graduate of the University of Colorado School of Law. And while he was there, he was one of the founding members and eventually became the president of the Immigration Law and Policy Society. And that entity tried to bring immigration issues and advocacy opportunities to the lawyers in training there. He also spent a year volunteering at REMAIN, the Rocky Mountain Immigrant Advocacy Network. He's frequently visited Denver's ICE detention center to assist people detained there. And he's also worked out of Colorado Law's Criminal Immigration Defense Legal Clinic to give free representation to people in ICE custody. He writes academically on changes in immigration law and the effects of these changes on immigrants. And his works have been published in law journals such as the University of Southern California, Gold School of Law's Interdisciplinary Law Journal, and the Yale Law Journal Forum. And he enjoys speaking on broad policy issues related to immigration. And I think we're very lucky to have him with us today. So Zach, I'm going to turn it over to you for the update on DACA and what's happening in Washington these days. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Helen, and I'm so happy to be invited to speak with everybody today. I guess the way I kind of wanted to go about this is to give a little bit of a history lesson, talk a little bit about my experiences with DACA, and then give an update about where we're at now. My experience doing these types of things is that it's, I guess, most I suppose, beneficial if we're able to have a little bit more of a dialogue. So if at any time anybody has any questions, feel free to raise your hand or say, hey, shut up, Zach, I've got a question. I'm more than happy to stop and address anything that anybody has any questions about. And I suppose with that, I'll jump right in. So I'm going to take everybody back about 25 years to the Clinton administration. This is where I think that the origins of DACA and really why we need a DACA and a DREAM Act come from. In that administration, there was a bill passed called the Illegal Immigration Responsibility and Immigrant Reform Act, IRA, of 1996. It kind of laid the framework for what the modern immigration system is now. There's a few things that it did. It really tightened border control and border restrictions, and most salient to DACA, it created these concepts of unlawful presence and bars to reentry based off of unlawful presence. So just as, I guess, a legal background on that, every day that somebody is in the United States without status, they are accruing a day of unlawful presence. When they have 6 months of that, they are barred from returning to the United States for 3 years as soon as they depart. If they have a year of unlawful presence, then as soon as they depart the United States, they're not able to return for 10 years. So the intention of that was, hey, we have this kind of porous border where people will come, work, leave, come, work, leave, and we want to kind of shut that down. We want to say, all right, people will only come with lawful visas to work in, industries that are, properly sponsoring them for this. But it kind of had the opposite effect. What actually happened is that people said, okay, well, if I leave now, I'm not able to come back, so I might as well just stay. And then that's where we, I think, got to this point where we have 11 million undocumented individuals in the United States. There's really just no way for them to leave and kind of cure their status without incurring these massive bars to coming back to the United States and coming back to their lives here. So fast forward about 5 years later, Congress is like, hey, we've got a problem. We've got these bars to reentry. People are coming to the United States with their 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 5-year-old kids. And those kids really don't have a future because they don't have status. They don't have an ability to get work authorization. They really don't have a way to get any sort of permanent residence or a pathway to citizenship. So we need to do something. And that was when the first DREAM Act was introduced. That's the Development, Relief, and Education for Alien Minors Act. That's where we get the term dreamer for DACA, for individuals seeking DACA and who have DACA. It's a bipartisan bill that was introduced in 2001. It didn't pass, but since then it's been reintroduced 10 to 15 times, depending on how you count it. Each time it's been a bipartisan, it's a very well-supported issue, but it's never passed. The closest it came was in 2010, 2011, passed the House, but it did not pass the Senate. It failed just by a couple of votes, I think 5 or 6 votes at that point. And then President Obama then said, hey, if Congress isn't going to do something about these folks who were brought here as children and have no way forward, I'm going to do something to the extent that I can as the president, as the member of the executive branch. Obviously, the president can't create new laws, but the president is the chief prosecutor. He's the highest level prosecutor in the country. So he can exercise what's called his prosecutorial discretion in saying, okay, these are the folks that we are going to go after for deportation, and these are the folks that we're not. And that's the creation of the DACA program, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And those first 2 words, that's really the key to what DACA is. It's deferred action. It's not a status. It's not a pathway to getting a green card. It's just deferring instituting any sort of deportation action against individuals who were brought here as minors and who meet a whole list of criteria. I could rant about it for a while, and I may later down the road. Really, it was to say, these individuals are not a priority. They are not criminals. They're seeking their education. They're not a threat to public safety or national security. There's no point in us wasting our kind of limited resources in targeting these people who have never known their home country really, and trying to deport them. Since then we've seen, I guess it kind of blossom and then wilt a little bit under the last administration, and now under the Biden administration is kind of being brought back through a recent executive order requesting the strengthening and revitalization of the DACA program. But I suppose before we get to the kind of more modern side of all of this, I'll talk a little bit about how DACA worked and how people who received DACA really felt about everything. My first real experience with DACA was about 2016, working with one of the legal clinics in the University of Colorado. We would do workshops to, help people renew their DACA applications or apply for initial DACA applications. And I would say the sense there that everybody had was that of reserved anxiety. They were all keenly aware of their place in the immigration system and their future. They knew that they have given all their personal information to the government saying, I'm a person without status, I'm a person who's here unlawfully, here's where I live, here's where I work, don't deport me, basically. And they also saw kind of the limitations on the careers and their pathways forward in their own lives. For one example, there was an individual at the University of Colorado who was studying aerospace engineering. He had been, wildly shooting up through the ranks at the place he was working, but all of a sudden he hit a wall, and that wall was the security clearances. He could work on projects where there was no sort of, Department of Defense contracts or government contracts involved. But as soon as the security clearance was necessary, he couldn't receive that because he technically didn't have any status. He had lawful presence in the United States, but no status and no way to get that status. So that's the wall he hit. Others hit similar walls in other ways. They're for example, licensure. I actually went to law school with some individuals who had DACA, and generally to receive a license, including a law license, you have to demonstrate that you're lawfully present in the United States and that you are not a person who violates the law on a frequent basis. So by being a person who did not have status and who perhaps worked without authorization before the DACA program was instituted, the admissions process can be very difficult, to say the least. There's a pretty well-known case, Edgar Barraza, who was one of the first ones to receive a law license, and he had to go through an immense amount of hurdles to actually get his license, because he worked at Wendy's when he was a teenager before he was able to get DACA, because that program had not even been instituted yet. He had exemplary character, no law violations, no criminal convictions or anything. It was simply that he was brought as a child to the United States, and he was living his life the best that he could before DACA was implemented. But there's this kind of concept, this idea that there was this ongoing legal violation, that somebody is constantly breaking the law by being in the United States without lawful status. And that created this huge barrier to pursuing the careers that these folks are trying to pursue. As fast forward about a year later, the Trump administration took over, and one of their first real priorities was to get rid of the DACA program. So in September, I believe, of 2017, President Trump rescinded the program, but did so in kind of a more politically expedient way, rather than saying, I don't want this program anymore, which is totally within his rights as, again, the chief prosecutor. He can say, I don't want, I don't want this program anymore. I don't want to exercise my discretion and not, pursuing these people for deportation. Rather than doing that, he said, I don't think this program's lawful, and so I'm going to rescind it. He created a huge legal battle, massive issues that went all the way to the Supreme Court. But I mean, I guess regardless of the underlying legal basis of it all, Daca was rescinded, and that kind of reserved anxiety exploded into actual anxiety. People had a time limit on how long they were going to be authorized to work in the United States. And again, because they had been in the United States without status for over a year, if they were to depart and try to go and, I guess, cure that status, get a visa, if they were married to a US citizen or somebody who had a green card, and they were going to try to go acquire their own green card at a consulate, as soon as they left, they're going to be barred from coming back for 10 years. So there was really no way forward for them. They were stuck, and there was a time limit on how long they were going to be, I guess, permitted to be here in a lawful status, a lawful presence. And I guess in addition to that, they had already given all of their information to the government. So if they were to be targeted for deportation, government had all their information already. They could just come and knock on their door. So we went around the state with the University of Colorado and these legal clinics, trying to renew as many people's status as we possibly could. And again, I would say the anxiety was kind of through the roof at that point. People were trying to, I guess, buy as much time as they possibly could to figure out what their next steps would be. It was very successful. We got a lot of people renewed for their DACA, and gave them an extra 2 years of presence in the United States, but it was really a stopgap measure more than anything. Until that point, I guess, until the Supreme Court said, hey, you got to bring DACA back, and I believe it was 2019, and people were getting ready to be undocumented, to be fully undocumented, and to have I guess, to live in the shadow economy and the shadow, really the shadow citizenship, the second-class citizenship status that folks without some sort of legal presence and legal status have. So, I mean, I guess we move forward, and it's 2019. The Supreme Court has said the way that you have rescinded DACA is unlawful. You can just say you don't want it anymore, but if the reason that you are rescinding it is just because you don't think it's unlawful, that's not correct, and you'll need to do it in a different way. So DACA was brought back in a very limited capacity, and again, it was this scramble to try to get people as much time as possible before I guess something could be done, which was, I guess, good, because we got an extra year, an extra 2 years for folks, and that brought us to the Biden administration, which reinstituted the DACA program and has now allowed people to once again push forward with DACA applications, including initial DACA applications, so long as they qualify for it. These folks are now living in that legal limbo once again that they've been living in for 9 years, but it's better than nothing, I suppose. Where we're at right now with the DREAM Acts and with actually a pathway to citizenship is, in my opinion, probably the best we've been since 2001. We have 2 different DREAM Acts in the Congress right now that are kind of going on and kind of going through the whole congressional process. It's the DREAM Act and then the Dream and Promise Act. Both have kind of slightly different requirements, but this is a sympathetic issue, and like I said before, it's always been bipartisan. So my hope and my belief is that it will be passed in this Congress, and then finally these folks who have been living in this legal limbo and living kind of in this shadow economy for so long will have a way to move forward. They'll have a way to get what's called conditional permanent residence, where they're able to live as permanent residents for a short period of time with additional conditions attached, and then those conditions can be removed down the line. One of the bills has 8 years as a conditional resident, one has 10 years. It's not ideal, because there are ways for that to be rescinded, and those people can be once again kind of thrust back into the limbo that they were in before, or altogether just put into an undocumented status, but better than nothing and a pathway forward. So we're definitely happy with where it's going. That's my prediction, is that things will get better. And yeah, as a whole, I guess the rather than reserved anxiety, it's kind of reserved hope that people are feeling. It's not quite blossomed into a belief that they're going to have status soon, but people are very hopeful in a way that they haven't been in a very long time. Yeah, so I suppose that's where we're at with DACA right now. I can jump into some of the requirements for DACA and I guess some of the secondary benefits for DACA as well. But again, if there's questions at any point, please just say, "Shut up, Zach, I've got a question." I suppose back up to why DACA is important for a lot of individuals beyond just the
Zach,
yes.
excuse me, I wanted to ask you if you know offhand if it's important to get this passed before the 2022. I just wonder, how bipartisan is it? Is it something we need to do before the fall?
Right. I would say it is important to do it that way because, I mean, as soon as the congressional session ends, we'll have to reintroduce the bill. There will be, I guess there's a potential for shakeups in some of the special elections that are going on. Folks retire. It is important to pass it now, but it's always been a bipartisan issue. And even under the Trump administration, where the DACA program was rescinded, there was a push that Trump had to bring into some sort of a legal status as a whole. It was used as a bargaining chip for some other immigration policies, including the border wall, funding for the border wall. And for those reasons, it was never able to reach that compromise that let it be passed. But both sides of the aisle want this issue to be resolved. It's just a matter of when, I suppose. So I suppose the short answer to the question is I do think it's important to get it passed before the fall in this term. But if it doesn't, then I think next year it's still totally possible for it to be passed. And I don't think that there is an immense amount of opposition to it. When Biden first kind of was getting into office, he put forth a comprehensive immigration reform bill that included the DREAM Act in it. And since then, he's kind of been piecing it apart and pushing forward various parts of that kind of comprehensive reform. And the DREAM Act is one of them. And because it is so bipartisan, because Dreamers are so they're so sympathetic, really is a big part of it. I believe that in the next couple of years we will see an actual DREAM Act be passed. Yeah, if that answers your question, I'll jump back to why I guess this deferred action can also help in other ways. One of the biggest being that by having this lawful presence, folks are able to get kind of secondary benefits from their state and local governments. Here in Colorado, we have what's called the Asset Bill, which allows for in-state tuition for folks who have DACA, as well as access to financial aid. And that's one part that people don't really think about when they talk about folks with DACA or other non-citizens who are seeking to better themselves through education, is that they're just not eligible for federal loans and grants and things like that. So they have to pay out of pocket and out-of-state tuition for the schools that they're going to be attending, unless the state is willing to push forward legislation to help them out. And Colorado, thankfully, is one of those. So in-state tuition and financial aid for folks who graduated high school, which is a requirement or graduate high school or pursuing graduating high school is a requirement to acquiring DACA. And after that, if they want to attend school, they're able to get financial aid and they're able to get that lower in-state tuition to attend the schools that they want to attend without having to, I guess, save up $100,000 for a year for tuition. Not quite up to date on what the out-of-state tuition costs are for all the schools, but it's significantly higher than an in-state tuition would be. Along those same lines, I was talking about the licensure before. By having lawful presence, you're able to apply for a lot of licenses that you wouldn't be able to before. I mentioned, law licenses. One of the questions that are asked is if you have lawful presence in the United States. And if you don't, because you don't have DACA, you're not able to push forward with acquiring your law license. So folks who were attending law school in 2017, 2018, 2019, when things were getting ready to be pulled away, we're trying to figure out where could they go, what could they do, how could they practice law, become lawyers, pursue the career paths that they wanted to pursue while being totally undocumented. There is at least one state, in California, I think Massachusetts might have done the same thing, but I would have to double check to be absolutely sure on that. But at least California permits totally undocumented folks to practice law, but there's other jurisdictions. I mean, not everybody wants to California, and there's other professions. Not everybody wants to be a lawyer, where you could not receive the license to practice in the profession that you wanted to practice in. So yeah, I suppose that's my broad history and where we're at with DACA. I can jump into the requirements and start ranting about that, but again, just want to stop just to make sure there's no questions before I do so. And with no objections, jump. Oh, is that a question, Rain? Sorry, you filled up the screen again. All right, I will take the speaker
Hey,
spot.
Zach, I've got a question for you, Zach.
Of course.
You talk about the DREAM Act and that your hopes that it will be passed in some form, perhaps in the next year or few years. I've lost the thread here. Tell us again, what would the DREAM Act do?
So the DREAM Act, so I guess it's a difference between DACA, which is deferred action, and DREAM Act, which would give a pathway to citizenship and a pathway to actual lawful status for folks who have been brought here as minors and who were physically present and not gang members, not threats to public safety and things like that. So it's the difference between for folks with DACA who, and the way you can kind of conceptualize it, are in violation of the law, but the government has said, you're not a priority, we're not going to go after you. And the DREAM Act, which would say, okay, here's permanent residence for you. Here is a work card that will not go away, and a way for you to actually become a citizen of the country rather than.
So are the requirements for the DREAM Act the same as the requirements to receive DACA status, or are they tighter? Or?
They're definitely tighter. So for example, in order to receive DACA, you have to show that you were present in the United States on June 15th of 2012 and had been present in the United States continuously 5 years before that. You have to be, I believe it was 15 at the time of June 15th, 2012, in order to receive DACA. I believe it's the Dream and Promise Act, you have to have been in the United States for it's either 8 years or a little bit more. You have to be a conditional resident for a longer period of time. There's, I guess, stricter requirements on the types of crimes that could disqualify you. Just generally, there are tighter requirements for these DREAM Acts, and I guess that makes sense, because on the one hand, DACA is saying, hey, you're breaking the law, but we're not going to go after you, whereas a DREAM Act and the pathway to citizenship that those would bring are saying, okay, we're going to let you reside here permanently, either as a permanent resident or as a citizen of the United States, and there's additional screening that has to go into effect then, which would likely include having to go and be interviewed by an immigration officer at the USCIS office. That's the typical procedure for receiving a green card and in other methods. So yeah, there's tighter requirements for these DREAM Acts, and it makes sense why.
Okay, Zach, how, in California, we all, LACC, Latin America, Caribbean, knows a couple lawyers here who are DACA, and they work with the immigrants in TJ and in San Diego. Now, was that from the governor, or did California vote on that? How did that happen?
So attorney regulation, so the lawyers are very self-centered, and we decide that we don't need anybody to tell us what to do. So there's a a regulatory body for attorneys called the Attorney Regulation Committee, and they put forth rules about what character and fitness requirements are for practicing law. In Colorado, we have lawful presence as a requirement, not lawful status necessarily. You don't have to be a permanent resident. You don't have to be a citizen, but you at least have to show that you're present here in a lawful way, which includes DACA. In California, the Attorney Regulation Committee, and I believe that it actually went through a whole court case culminating in the Supreme Court of California, basically said, okay, you can practice law without having lawful presence. There's nothing saying that you're a person of poor character just because you were brought here as a child and I've been living in a kind of civil violation since then. Obviously, they still have to meet all the other character and fitness requirements, which includes the criminal background checks and things like that. But yeah, in California, through a series of court cases and advocacy by the bar itself, that law was, or that policy was changed. But yeah, for attorneys, it's a self-regulatory body where we very much try to say what and who can be lawyers ourselves, rather than having the governor or the legislature tell us who's eligible to be attorneys. Which I guess leads a little bit to why it's difficult to get somebody who is entirely undocumented to be an attorney. There's a bit of a conservative mindset to this, where we don't want to open it up too much and allow, I guess, inquiries into whether somebody who might not be fit to practice law is practicing law, and invite the legislature at that point to say, these are the requirements for being an attorney, or even the executive branch through the governor and through the Department of Regulatory Affairs to say, these are the requirements for a license to practice law.
Zach, I have one more question. DACA eligible. You mentioned that as the program currently stands, you have to have been present in the United States prior to a certain date, and you have to have it seemed to me that the criteria result in you have to be a certain age to even be eligible for DACA, and with every year that goes by, you have to be older and older in order to qualify. Am I understanding that right?
Kind of.
So kids who were brought here 10 years ago at the age of 3, they don't qualify.
So right? they could qualify. So the problem is that you have to be you have to have been under 16 on June 15, 2012. So you can be 35 now. My math lawyers aren't known for math. However, you could be 31 now and still qualify as long.
But if you're 21 years old now, you wouldn't
were,
qualify,
under
right?
16 on June 15, 2020. If you're 21, you could still be under 16 on June 12, 2015. The problem with that would just be showing that you were present for those 5 years before that.
Okay.
So it does, I suppose, at a certain point, limit eligibility, because let's say you were brought here 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and you're just barely missing the requirements as far as that time limit. Yeah, you would no longer qualify just because of the date that your parents brought you over.
Is there any discussion of revising those dates, those numbers, those criteria?
Yeah, it would have to be through executive action from the Biden administration, and I imagine that if the DREAM Acts are stalled or don't pass, then that will happen. And Biden administration is. President Biden was the vice president during the Obama administration, of course, so he is at least supportive of the DACA program as it was enacted, and I don't see any real indication that he would try to limit it any further.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely, but I guess that leads to a broader point about immigration under the Biden administration. I mentioned that there was a comprehensive immigration reform bill that was kind of introduced as guideline, I suppose, from the Biden administration, saying this is what we want and what we expect and what we would hope for in reforming immigration. And there's been a great deal of props given to the Biden administration for that, rightly so. But I think that there needs to still be some check on that. There needs to be some idea that it's not all roses on that side. We need to still kind of analyze his actions in other respects with immigration, most particularly as it applies to kind of overseas immigration. The Trump administration during the height of COVID implemented a few presidential proclamations that restrict the entry of individuals from places such as the United Kingdom, most countries in Europe, China, Iran, Brazil, and the Biden administration has not rescinded those. As a result of that, people are completely unable to get visas right now, completely unable to get their permanent residence through those visas, and a backlog of about 500,000 immigrant visa applicants are still waiting now, just overseas, saying, hey, I have my U.S. citizen spouse waiting for me in the U.S. and I can't get my green card to come on over. So I'd say with the Biden administration, my broad thoughts are great props for everything that they're doing domestically so far, but there is still room to be pushing them, still room to say, hey, you're not quite living up to your promises and your ideals as far as immigration as a whole. I guess let me go back to the DACA requirements and rant a little bit about why some of them make no sense. My biggest gripe, I suppose, is with the criminal bars to eligibility for DACA. So to get DACA, you cannot have a felony conviction. That makes sense. Okay, we're saying we're not going to go after you because you're not a priority for deportation. You're not a threat to anybody. You're not a risk to public safety. If you have a felony conviction, okay, maybe that doesn't quite apply in the same way. On the other side, if you have 3 misdemeanor convictions, same thing, you're not eligible for DACA. And that kind of makes sense. I think less so, but it still makes sense because you're saying, okay, you've got 3 criminal convictions, you're less of a upstanding citizen than somebody who has none. But there's this middle ground that was invented for DACA, and it's only in DACA eligibility that this is kind of an oxymoron in the law. It's if anybody who has been convicted of a significant misdemeanor is ineligible for DACA. It's an oxymoron in the sense that a misdemeanor is, by definition, not a significant crime. Stealing a candy bar could be a misdemeanor. Stealing a car would be a felony. What is a significant misdemeanor then? There's not really a definition beyond what they've, I guess, laid out as a couple of examples, and then kind of a catch-all of if you've been convicted of a crime that resulted in more than 90 days in jail. So some of the examples of specific crimes that would qualify as significant misdemeanors include domestic violence and driving under the influence. And that's where I think a big problem comes, is the driving under the influence statute and driving under the influence bar. I think there's a big reason to suggest that there's perhaps some discrimination that could happen as a result. Here in Colorado, we have two different levels of driving under the influence. We have, a DUI, which is having a 0.08 blood alcohol level. That's kind of the standard, driving under the influence statute, and it's kind of across the board. That one makes sense. That one I don't really have problems with. But we also have this other statute for driving while ability impaired, a DWAI, and you could have a 0.001 blood alcohol level, but if a police officer says in their own discretion that your ability was impaired to drive, whether that because you had some cough medicine before you started driving and maybe didn't fully stop at a stop sign and got a ticket, that would count as a driving under the influence violation, and either mean that your DACA would be rescinded, or that you could no longer renew your DACA, or now that you could no longer apply for initial DACA. It's been a big hot topic for the last year or so of policing, and how certain policing policies are a bit discriminatory, and I believe that's one of them. Somebody who is brought from a Latin American country is a minority who is more likely to be targeted by police, and these discretionary statutes that kind of allow for driving while ability impaired, while you have a 0.01 blood alcohol level. You had half a beer before you drove home from a restaurant, but were pulled over by a police officer for speeding or what have you. Could really end your future in the United States. So that's one that I have probably the biggest gripe with. Just as a lawyer, it doesn't make sense that there's such a thing as a significant misdemeanor, and not all the categories quite make sense to me. I mean, obviously, like some do, domestic violence makes sense. That's, again, we're talking about public safety. We're talking about priorities for deportation. If we're saying a person is not a threat to the public, having a domestic violence conviction, okay, perhaps is grounds for saying the opposite, and his grounds for rescinding that deferred action and no longer using that prosecutorial discretion. But it needs to be, I guess, tempered in less discretion, and it needs to be, I guess, grounds for forgiveness and grounds for rehabilitation should be included in any sort of these statutes and any sort of these policies. My big thing right now, my big push is that immigration laws in general are very unforgiving and very draconian as it comes to criminal laws, and that all comes back to that IRA, the Illegal Immigration Responsibility and Immigrant Reform Act of 1996, really push forward this idea that there's not going to be forgiveness and not going to be room for rehabilitation. The person's been convicted, whether that be through a deferred sentence where they don't even go to jail, they're still going to be subject to all the consequences that they would receive if they had a full jury trial and then were sentenced to jail for however long that crime carries. So I feel like I've been ranting for a while. Stop for any other questions right now? All right. So
I have a question. So given that one hopes the DREAM Act passes sooner rather than later, what can we as individuals or what can nonprofits or other people who care about immigration do to support the passage of the law? I guess we as individuals would be the gist of the question.
So I suppose individuals and organizations, but the answer I would have would be the same, and that would be to contact your representatives and really let them know how important this issue is to you. There's, I think, 450 organizations have already written letters to various members of Congress supporting the passage of a DREAM Act this congressional session, saying, this needs to happen. And that's really pushed, I think, the issue in a lot of ways that it hasn't before. Immigration was not really in the spotlight for a very long time, and the last 4 years really changed that. We were, all of a sudden had all of the kind of shady practices of the enforcement side of immigration thrust up upon us. We learned about kind of the ways of that migrants are coming to the United States. I think that the popular discourse now is really discussing kind of the ways that the various, for example, Central American countries are suffering and creating a major asylum and refugee crisis. So now suddenly both members of Congress and the public are I guess, informed and knowledgeable about immigration matters. And as we are able to kind of push that even more with our representatives, it'll be a higher priority for them to get that passed as well. I mean, in the end, they represent us, and the more we talk to them, the more they know where we stand, the more our wishes and our desires will get reflected in policy and on the Hill.
Zach, I have another question. Are those crimes, the status crimes, like being in the country without papers, is that one of those misdemeanors or what, or is that not considered, or how is that?
So just about every single immigration crime is not really a crime so much as a civil infraction. You can think of it kind of as the same things as a parking ticket. That's not a criminal statute that you're being prosecuted under. It's a civil infraction. The only one that I can think of is actually unlawfully crossing the border. Counts as a misdemeanor, and I suppose in that sense it would count as one of the three if you were convicted of it. But as far as immigration violations in general, working without authorization, being without status, those types of things, those aren't crimes so much as civil infractions for which you suffer civil penalties that, I mean, in a lot of ways seem the same as criminal penalties, including detention and removal. I mean, deportation in a lot of ways is a punitive and I guess very serious punitive response to somebody's status crime, as you said. But the Supreme Court has said that removal and deportation is not a punishment, and that they're not crimes. They're just civil infractions, civil detention, which you would expect to not be even a lawful practice, to lock somebody up for something that is not a crime. But it's something that happens. But sorry, ranted a little bit. Answer to the question is, the only one that I could think of that could even qualify into that would be the actual crossing the border without authorization, and you'd have to be convicted of that. And that just, I suppose, doesn't happen as often as people perhaps think.
Yeah, Zach, what about right now, the undocumented minors that are coming? And also, what about the families? No longer are the little kids being taken away from their family, but they've been picked up by the Border Patrol and seeking asylum. They're not here yet. I mean, some are. 5,000 young women have been sent to all parts of the US from San Diego. They've been in our convention center. But what about them? Would that's why we need to pass the DREAM Act, and then they could have a path. Are they going to be able to go to school? I mean, this immigration is something else, huh?
Yeah, it sure is. It's been the only other area of law that the courts have said is as complicated as taxes. And I mean, I can't even do my own taxes. So I suppose, in answer to your question, under the requirements for DACA, those children wouldn't qualify because they weren't present in the United States in 2012. So
right.
They simply don't have a path forward with as far as that goes. There's other types of statuses that can be pursued for minors, including and especially unaccompanied minors. There's a special immigrant juvenile status for folks who have been abandoned by one of their parents or both of their parents. They can certainly apply for asylum as well. As far as the separation of families, I mean, it's a horrible practice that is actually still ongoing, as it seems you guys are aware.
It is.
The government's trying to fix as best they can that harm that happened. We are getting emails. There is a settlement that the government's going to try to offer free mental health services for families that have been separated. But it's an ongoing problem that's not been fixed by just the change in administration. And this is one of those reasons that I think we've got to give props to the Biden administration for stepping up and changing a lot of the bad practices of the last 4 years. But they haven't fixed everything, and there are still things that are going on that need remedying, and we need to hold their feet to the fire with that. It's again writing your senator and representative and saying that this is not acceptable is I think it's imperative for us to do.
I see Alicia has a question.
and Connie.
Alicia, you're muted still. Alicia, you're still muted there.
Alicia, can you hit the unmute? There you go.
Got it. I think. You know, you did allude to the comprehensive immigration reform bill. For years, many years, 20, 30, we have talked about a broken system, and we're not getting any closer. I know you're talking about, you know, the DACA and the DREAM Act, but this would come under it, of course, if something were done that was sensible and not separating families for 10 years. And it's no wonder that people sneak across back to the United States after they've been sent away because they want to be reunited with family. What can be done about that from your point of view? It's just, it's the most inhumane system, I think, that it's crazy law. You know, it's a broken system.
Absolutely, I 100% agree. I think there's little fixes that can be done that don't necessarily need to come under comprehensive immigration reform. I think that there's that's absolutely necessary, but I mean, I was speaking to various members of Congress over the last couple of months about an Article 1 immigration court, taking it out of the Department of Justice, for example, and making it its own court. And that it's like both sides don't want to give the other side a win. And that's, I mean, that's a big problem. But little fixes here and there can really remedy a lot of these problems. For example, the 3 and the 10-year bars that I was talking about, if we remove those, all of a sudden, these folks who have been here for a long time and would otherwise qualify for either a type of lawful status, whether that be a work visa or even permanent residence, could depart the country, go to the consulate, get those visas, and come back.
Right back.
It would be all of a sudden this bar, this thing that's kind of like trapping them in the country and forcing them to work without authorization, and in this shadow economy where they really get abused in a lot of ways. Just by removing those bars, that could be alleviated so much. And that is in the comprehensive immigration reform bill, but I suppose it's not quite as pushed as other things such as DACA and temporary protected status. So I suppose little fixes here and there would be probably the best path forward, in my opinion, just because the state of politics right now is that you know, nobody can win, and that just means that everybody suffers as a result. But we are seeing progress on things like the DREAM Act, things like temporary protected status. We're seeing agricultural workers are getting additional rights through Congress, things like that. So definitely smaller things that can be passed that perhaps don't create this, like, you know, the Democratic Party has, you know, solved this issue for so many people, or the Republican Party has solved this issue for so many people, making it just be like, you know, here's a very technical bill that isn't a win for anybody, but actually has a lot of real world impact and actually, you know, saves the day for thousands or millions of families.
Connie.
So I'm really curious, Zach, like, if internationally there's any place on the planet where there's some examples of what might provide the kind of windows and legal apertures for people. You know, I think it's because we're living at a time when we can see that legal systems have been used to institutionalize racism. And we're looking at it in so many different places, but I'm really curious if internationally there's some place that just says, oh, come on in, you are welcome.
So top of my head, there's the places that have that type of system normally require a lot of money for you to get that. Cyprus had that, for example. You can become a permanent resident here. You just have to invest, I think it was something like $500,000, $800,000 in in their development. And here's permanent residence for you then. So it very much is it's a broken system. Like you said, there's institutionalized racism. The United States has, I mean, it historically has had a much more open immigration policy and immigration system than a lot of other countries. And in fact, even as far as citizenship goes, the United States has extremely low requirements as compared to other countries, which is part of the reason in a lot of ways citizenship doesn't come with as many benefits as it does in other countries. It's a kind of a double-edged sword. You can become a citizen easier here, but the benefits you get aren't so much more than being a permanent resident here. So I suppose, yeah, short answer to your question is I can't think of any examples of any countries that are, come on in where there's not strings attached, and usually those strings are money. Because money always talks, right?
No, it's true. I live in Guatemala and I'm a reverse immigrant. And that's exactly what I had to do.
There you have it. There you have it.
Yeah.
Was there one more person who was waving their hand? I'm not sure if I missed somebody. No? Okay, well, I guess let me just.
I think I see Pat maybe.
Oh, Pat.
Go ahead, Pat.
Sorry, Pat.
Yes, I have visited the Geo Detention Center here.
Absolutely, yeah, frequently, and when I was working with it's the Rocky Mountain Immigrant Advocacy Network, I was volunteering there a lot. I'd say that was one of the most harrowing experiences I've ever had. You talk to people who have gone through just hells that we can't even imagine, and as they're trying to navigate this system that we ourselves are having difficulty even wrapping our minds around, and they're doing it on their own. Truly one of my least favorite places on the planet. But I suppose, I guess, to expand upon that, when going there, the folks that have always been saddest for me are the folks who have DACA and who perhaps committed some sort of crime or a couple of crimes that are losing their status and are being, I guess, put into removal proceedings. I spoke to one lady, must have been 2-3 years ago now. She was just involved, not in like a very serious way, but like, in the car and charged as an accomplice in a theft crime. And as a result, she was having her DACA status rescinded, and she was going to be deported to a country where she didn't speak the language. She had no memories of. She had no family. Yeah, truly, it's one of my least favorite places on the planet, and I don't know the fix. I don't know the fix, but detention as a whole. I know abolish ICE has been a slogan for a while, and it's it's politically charged, and there's obviously a lot more nuance to it than get rid of immigration enforcement. But there's a lot that can be done that doesn't involve absolutely inhumane practices. People are put into solitary confinement for years because they are fleeing a place where they are fearing their own death. Yeah, that's sorry, that's I suppose an aside from the DACA side of everything. But yeah, the Geo facility is not my favorite place, and the people in it are they're really suffering. Anybody who's in Colorado and wants to, there's some great nonprofits around here that organize, for example, visits for people who have been in detention, and they might be there for months or years as their immigration cases kind of unfold, and they'll never receive a visitor. And in the meantime, they're in prison, but it's kind of worse than prison because they're not even afforded the same rights as somebody who's in an actual prison, because this is civil detention and it's not a punishment that you're there. It's just a practical necessity, I suppose, of having you come here without status.
Zach, if you want to share the names of those with me by email, I can get the names of those organizations to everybody to in case they want to pursue the visiting option that you just mentioned. I'm also just conscious of the time. I know that we've taken up an hour of your day, and it's probably time for us to wrap up. But this was so helpful for me, and I know for all of us, in terms of understanding better the DACA program itself and the landscape going forward. And thank you so much for all the work that you're doing and for taking the time to help educate us. I'll share any thoughts that you have with everybody if you want to send me an email about the visits. But this was just really splendid. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us.
It was my pleasure. It was really wonderful speaking with everybody here. And it's really fun to be involved with this. So I really appreciate even the invitation. Have a
Thank
wonderful
you so
day,
much.
everybody. I love to see that everybody's involved and interested in these issues. It was kind of, like I said, not on the front lines for so long, but it's always been there. So it's reassuring to me to see so many people who are involved in trying to make the world a better place through this.
We're there
Before
with
we
you.
go, Zach, I want to thank you, and I also want to recognize Georgia, who, as I understand it, will you be studying law, or are you a lawyer?
No, so I'm actually going to be in the Loretto Volunteer Program starting in August for a year. And so I'll be working as a paralegal in El Paso, Texas. Yeah.
Great.
Welcome.
We're so happy you're here.
Yes.
Thank you all for
so
letting me
much.
join.
Yeah.
Welcome, Georgia. And thank you so much, Helen, for putting together this program. And Zach, thank you so much, not only for your presentation, but also for your commitment to this work. We've learned so much today, and I want to thank everyone else for joining today. We will get information to you about an action that you can do. Zach, if you get that information about nonprofits, we'll get that. We usually attach an action to the immigration spotlight, so that could be an action for people as well. So thanks, everyone. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful Friday. Thanks
Alicia
for
has
being
something to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something about having Helen on the program. I've read 2 of her books on immigration, the one on the girls in North Denver, and the other one about the new immigrants learning English at South High School. And the 2 of them are just great for the LACC to get involved in, or to read and, just learn a lot about. Anyway,
great idea.
2 wonderful books, right?
Thank you, Alicia. And Zach's boss, Jeff Joseph, helped get DACA status for one of the young women in Just Like Us. So yeah, and actually helped get a permanent legal status for another of the young women in Just Like Us. He worked with both.
Great.
Had no legal status when the book was written and helped them. So it was pretty amazing. So
Well,
thank
you.
Zach, tell Jeff we're very grateful to him as well.
Okay.
And I would just like to
Thank
say
you,
that
Alicia, for
LACC is very grateful to have Helen working with us.
Yeah.
Oh,
Most
you bet.
definitely.
For
You bet.
sure. Yes. You made great
Yes,
contributions
thank
already, Helen. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
you. Next, oh, sorry, Sally.
Yeah.
My internet was delayed. We look forward to the next Immigration Spotlight, I believe on the 23rd. So stay tuned for that. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Take
Thanks,
care.
everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, Zach.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.